Please welcome Fred Brown.
Thank you. So I'm glad we got rid of that picture because I'm actually wearing the exact same suit today that I was in that and the exact same tie that I was wearing in that picture. So I'm glad that's gone. Good morning. I'm excited to be here in Reno, Nevada, and I want to make sure I said that correctly. Did it come out right? Okay. Because yesterday we were at breakfast and I said, I'm happy to be in Nevada, and someone said, oh, thank God you didn't say Nevada or Nevada, the Nevada or whatever the other one was. And then I started thinking, well, what is it now? Because when they put those in my head, all of a sudden I couldn't remember what was the right one. So I'm happy to be here, happy to be joining you, and I'm happy that it's not snowing right now and that it's raining. So I'm happy about all those things as well. And I'm happy for the conversation you had this morning. I thought that was a powerful conversation, and I learned a lot as I listened to Tiffany. And I want you to know, just to set expectations right up front, I have no understanding or deep knowledge of your district practice. If a question comes up about the equity team and the work of that group, I'm going to say, Jeff, that's the man. He can answer those questions. But I do want to continue the conversations, and I want us to just kind of think about sort of where we come from, who we are, and how that informs how we engage with others. But I also want us to think about how do we create professional learning experiences, because if you know Learning Forward, you know that our focus is on professional learning. And we're always thinking about how do you create opportunities, how do you create structures, how do you create environments and conditions to enable everyone to be at their best, regardless of what the topic is. Today the topic was diversity and equity. The topic tomorrow could be mathematics, or it could be a new curriculum that's coming to the district. But are there curriculum or are there professional learning structures in place to help everyone be at their best? The topic could be related to something very technical. It could be a new product that we're using in the district or in the system. It could be all kinds of different things. So I'll be coming at it from that angle. But first, our belief as an organization is what's on the screen. And I know that's your belief as an organization as well, because I could tell from the questions you asked and the conversations in which you were engaged this morning. Here is our vision statement and our mission statement, and this whole notion of equity and excellence in teaching and learning is how we come at our work and how we think about the work that we do. So lots of outcomes today, and we may get to some of them and we may not get to all of them, but the cool thing is I have a session in the afternoon that whatever I don't get to in the morning, I'm just going to extend it into the afternoon's conversation. But here's some of the things that I'm hoping we might be able to do. And as I was sitting back there listening to Tiffany, if any of you have been in these situations where you have a presentation that you're about to do and then you're sitting in the room with the person who's right before you, the odds are you're going to make a few tweaks to that presentation. So as I was listening to Tiffany, I was back there, oh my gosh, I want to make sure we say this or have this kind of conversation. So here are some of the things that I want us to think about. One, just this whole notion of bias is part of a broader conversation, so we'll jump into some of that just a bit. But I really want us to think about, so how is learning structured in this district for you and your department, in your school, in your office, with whomever you work? How is your learning structured? And I would love to have that conversation. And then how do we create some of those learning environments so that we can increase all of our capacity, as I said before, regardless of what the subject is? So we'll see how many of these that we get to. But before I do any of that, on a sheet of paper, just jot down very quickly, when it comes to training, when it comes to professional development, when it comes to professional learning, or whatever term you use to describe that, what are some of your beliefs about it? What are some of your thoughts about it? And just write that down, because I want to get a sense of from which direction and what angle do you come when it comes to professional learning. So just take a moment to write that down somewhere. And it's interesting when I ask this question. So for some people, it's like a quick, I love it, and they're done. And for other people, it's like, oh, where do I begin? Let me tell you the story that we had in terms of this professional learning experience back in my school or district or unit or whatever it might be. So I really want your honest reflections on this because I'm curious how you think about learning for the adults in the system, and particularly how you think about learning for the work that you do. And so I'm going to apologize right up front. I'm going to put it out there on the table. I'm going to have you up and moving around. And for some people, it's going to be like, oh, I don't want to get, like you're happy to be in your seat, you're comfortable. I promise you'll always get to return to your seat, so that'll be your home location. I'm not going to make you move permanently. But there are going to be times when I'm going to ask you to get up and move. And we're about to enter into one of those right now. And I'm going to ask you to have conversations with different people that you may not normally talk to. And so that's about to happen right now as well. So I want you to think about what you just wrote down in terms of professional learning and your beliefs and how it happens in this system. And I want you to think about, from your vantage point in the organization, from where you sit and the work that you do, how is learning for adults structured in your space, in your unit, in your school, whatever it might be? How is learning for adults structured? And one of these pictures I want you to choose as the one that best represents for you how you believe learning for adults. Now, this is not how the leadership structure is set up in the district. This is about learning. And one of these models, you can imagine the circles being people or departments or whatever you want to think of the circles and the lines being communication or whatever. You can attach meaning to a dotted or dashed line or a straight line. That's up to you. But as you look at these, one of these may not be exactly how it's structured for you, but I'm hoping that one of these comes close. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you to commit to 1 through 5. And when you commit to 1 through 5, I'm going to ask you to put your hand up in the air, and whichever hand you have that has 5 fingers, to make a choice of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and put it up there so that everyone can see. And I'm going to ask us all to do it at the same time. So commit to your number. And in just a second, I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and hands up in the air. Any questions on what I'm asking you to do? All right. So on the count of 3, 1, 2. Now you'll notice some people aren't even looking like they're about to put their hand out. Have you noticed that? Look around the room. Some people are almost sitting on their hands. Like, my hand's not going up. But let me just tell you, I'm looking for every hand to go up. And if I don't see a hand up, I'm going to come and hover over you until you commit to 1 through 5. Okay, so let's just make sure that we set our expectations for what's about to happen. Okay, we good? Okay, so on the count of 3, you're choosing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, how learning for adults, from your vantage point, is best structured, or is structured currently, not how you want it to be, but how it's currently structured. Okay. This is what you experience. This is from your vantage point right now in this district. How is learning for adults structured for you as you experience it? Great question. Question over here?
So like number 4, there's the principals in the front telling everyone what
Getting a little ahead. How you interpret this is up to you. Okay? So everyone erase what you just heard. This is like the jury. Erase what you just heard. Now we're back to that didn't happen. So the point is how you experience learning. But thank you for asking the question. Other questions? Because once people realize they have to commit to putting their hand up, all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, I got to know what I'm doing. Got to know what I'm voting for. Okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, and 3. Hands up in the air. Keep them up, keep them up. Now, as you keep your hand up in the air, and wave them like you just don't care, as you keep your hands up in the air, I'm going to ask groups to come and congregate based on the choice that you made. So you can put your hand down right now so no one has to know right now what your choice was. But I'm going to ask the ones to come over here and have a conversation. Not yet. But I'm going to ask the ones to come over here and have a conversation about why you chose that. What were you thinking when you chose that? Maybe give some examples of why you thought we were a 1. And then maybe talk about, is 1 appropriate? Or would you tweak it and make it something different? but this is what's current. So that's what the ones are going to talk about. And then, so if you were a 1, here, and we're going to walk around the room, that's how we'll do this. So the 2s will have come over here. And this will be the 2 space, and you'll see I'll just keep walking around the room. And so the 3s, I'm going to put in that back corner over there. The 4s, I'm going to put in this corner over here. And just because how many, well, we'll put the 4s over here. And just because I'm guessing there might be, I don't know, a smaller group with the 4s and the 5s, I'm going to put the 5s right next to the 4s. Okay? So 4 or 5 over here. So take about 5 minutes for your conversation. Can I have my 1s over here, my 2s over here, my 3s back there, 4s and 5s over here? Now, if your group happens to be extremely large, it could happen with the 3s, please break up into 2 smaller groups so that there's not one large mega conversation. All right, so these are my 2s. Okay, so I'm going to ask my 3s to break up into 2 smaller groups. So the 3s that haven't gone over there yet, come over here and have a separate 3 conversation over here. And you guys are 3A, and you guys over here will be 3B, okay? All right, so 3s kind of come over here in this area, find a space over here. 4s, you're my 4s, okay, and this is the group of 5. All right, so the conversation is, why'd you make this choice? Is it the right choice? What would you tweak if you could? Just have that, give examples of why you made this choice, and I'll check with you in about 5 minutes. And so notice how group 1 is about to model something for you that the rest of you will find extremely fascinating. They have already chosen someone who's going to be the representative for their group. Someone who will speak about some of what came out of their discussions, and that person is already set and ready to go. And what that person is going to say is, here's kind of the essence of what we talked about. Here's, are they pointing to each other back there right now? Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Here's what we're going to talk, the essence of what we talked about, and this is why we chose it, et cetera, et cetera. So who's our representative for group 1 is? Say your name. Do you have a microphone over there? Is there a? Yeah, right here. Okay. Oh, perfect. Oh, thank you. We'll get this one. Is this? Hold on. We're going to get this turned on, I think. And what do I have to do to turn it on? Just hit this button that says on. Okay.
I don't want to touch anything.
Okay. There we go.
We interpreted number 1 to mean more of a trickle-down communication method. All people are represented here, from classified to teachers and counselors. We weren't able to come to a conclusion on how it could be improved upon. However, one of the things that was mostly talked about is that there was maybe a lack of involvement and possibly a lack of communication. So I think maybe communication could be improved upon. So I think that's it. Did I miss anything?
No, we got it right, Nancy.
All right, well, let's hear it for 1. All right, thank you. Okay, so 1 talked about trickle down. Just listen to the words that people use as they describe what the learning looks like and feels like from their vantage point. And I like the fact that you added, here's some things that would help make it better for you, communication being 1. Okay, 2 is all set because they've already identified their person because they paid attention to 1. Did that happen at the last minute, like just now?
Yeah, it totally did.
Okay, go ahead.
We talked about the organic process of how we were constantly sharing out with each other. And the conversation really evolved completely organically. And then we ended up talking about other organizational types that you had up here and how sometimes those come into place. But we thought we learn best when we constantly are sharing with each other. And I'm speaking totally for myself. Does anybody else want
Okay. I love the way you captured all of what the group was thinking and channeled it through your own interpretation. I think let's hear it for 2. All right, thank you. All right, so the organic nature of this, the fact that we learn based on what we need and that we can be in different groups at different times is part of what I'm seeing in number 2 and kind of heard from what you said. Who am I handing this to in number 3? Okay, there you go.
One thought that was...
This is 3A, by the way.
3A. One thought that circled through 3A was that when the teachers gather in their PLCs and whatnot, that you have this clustering of different thought processes. One question I posed is, who is at the center of that, though? Is that sort of in the mold of number one, where it's the principal, it's the top of the pyramid, or is that the student population or the individual student at the center? And speaking only for myself, I almost picked 5 because it seems like a lot of organizations, not a particular high school, have a tendency to go in that direction, but I think most of us being aspirationally rational bring it back to 3, and that's the challenge of what we have to do so that we do what we should and not what is.
Got it. So the people at 5 are like, don't steal our thunder with this 5 conversation.
Right.
But still, your point is well taken, and I think it's interesting to think about the middle being, like, who is that? Who are all the people in the middle? And there are lots of ways, and 3, if you just look at it 3D and pull that up, it could look like 1, really. So thinking about how to make sure that 3 doesn't become 1 if you see 1 as not a good thing, becomes something to think about. Okay, can we hear for 3A? Thank you. 3B, okay, got it. So Stephen, they pointed to you, excuse me.
Well, we have a large group, but I think the majority interpretation was that the center person in the middle there is the principal, and then she professionally develops the department leaders who then go to the individual teachers. There's also a thought of, as in terms of peer observation, where one teacher would go and observe another teacher, and then they would take best practices to the larger majority group teachers.
All right. Did he capture? Okay. And what's interesting in that one is we often think about professional development as, you actually use it as a verb, which happens a lot because we develop people. We do things, sometimes we think of it as to people. And one of the things that I'd like to have us think about as we explore professional learning is, what is the difference between professional learning, which we would like to argue is we're engaged in this learning together. And as a matter of fact, I own my own learning, and I get to determine at times based on what my student data are, what my learning needs are, what my professional learning looks like. And I think kind of what was implicit in what you were saying is we may not all need the same thing. There might be certain things that I need that you don't because my data and my student work and my engagement activities tell me that I need a different experience. So let's keep that in the back of our mind, but I thank you for 3B. I want to give them a round of applause as well. Thank you. So the first time I showed 4 to a group, there were people who were like, I don't know what the heck 4 is. Like, I have no idea what that is. So I can't wait to hear how you've made sense of 4 and who's our spokesperson for 4. Okay. Well, the hands keep going this way. Okay, got it. Just following the fingers.
Even though someone else had a lot more to say. Well, looking at 4, we really kind of saw it as these small groups that were reporting to a principal, and then maybe that principal was reporting out to their area superintendent with that information. So I remember one of the discussions that we were having was around, well, who makes the decisions when it comes to maybe setting up furniture in a room, or when it comes to maybe book decisions, that sort of thing. And it's like, well, if we are all in these different clusters, have the opportunity to kind of share the information with our principals or with our school leaders, then maybe that information can be then taken to the next step so that we can get those things that we need.
Nice. And you know what's interesting about 4 also, thank you, Jeff, is you could imagine 4 being a version of 2, right? Because you have different conversations, you might be in different groupings depending on the situation, but whomever is that top person, that becomes a really interesting conversation, right? Because what skills do they have, what understandings do they have of the learning needs of the folks that they support, and everything kind of rests on how you interpret that top circle. So this becomes an interesting one for us to consider as well. And you know, you can think about 1 versus 4 and see lots of similarities between the beginning of the structure, and then it starts to change drastically as you get towards the bottom. All right, let's hear it for 4. All right. And last but not least, we have number 5, and 3A tried to give a hint as to what you might say, but let's see what you really have to say in 5.
So I think most of us chose 5 because it was the most random. of the professional learning. So we had the gentleman here who just decided on his own to come, and just randomly someone from the school also came. So they're doing some sharing. To Tony, who in her position, they do meet together, but there are people who are left out. To myself and another person, we are subs. We're left out of everything. You were vital to your job, but we aren't included in any kind of learning. To the special ed teachers who, although they're a group, they're not quite sure where they fit in when it comes to learning.
Oh, thank you. All right, thank you, Janet. Okay. Wow, Janice, her own team gave her a standing ovation. That's wonderful. Okay, so as we walk back towards our seats, thank you all for engaging in that conversation. There's lots of different ways to interpret learning, which is just getting us started in this mindset of how does professional learning and training or staff development or all these things, what kind of an impact does it have on our practice, and what kind of an impact does it have on us personally and professionally? So that's the point of that discussion, but we want to bring it back to sort of this whole notion about equity, because that was the professional learning from this morning. So we're going to circle back to PO in a bit, but right now I'm going back into equity. And as you heard or saw this morning, the real learning, it's not going to come from anything I say. It's going to happen in the conversations that you have with each other. So I would encourage you, when we have those moments, I'm going to keep pushing you to get up and talk to people that perhaps you don't normally talk to as we go through the period today. So take a look at this. I'm going to just share a bit of my story. I forget what the gentleman's name was who shared a bit of his story in the video, but I'm going to share a bit of mine. But as you look at this, I want you to just take some guesses as to what part of my story might be. So look at this for a second. I guess I don't need this. What would be a guess as to one part of my story you think I'm going to share? Okay, there's a travel interest, yes. What is? I was on the Maury Povich show. Who's the father? Okay, so there's that. Okay, what else? What other guesses would you have? Yeah. I'm a Muslim. That's a great guess. What other guesses would you have? Amish. I am Amish. I'm an Amish Muslim. I'm the first Amish Muslim person you've ever met, is the guess. Okay. I like to hike. Okay. So as I share some of the stories, some of it was kind of close on some parts of it, but let's just get this out right away. I'm not an Amish Muslim. Okay, so there's my buggy is not parked out back, etc. It would have been a long way to get here from Dallas if I had taken the buggy, just so you know. So I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and born in a school district in a neighborhood where everyone looked like me. In this picture, thankfully, Iran is cutting off the top of my afro because it would take up the whole other square. Because back in the 70s, it was huge. It was a massive, massive afro because that's what we wore back then. And I remember, like, I could never get it shaped right. Like, I would stand there every morning with my pick and try to get my afro right, and it would always look off. And then after a while, I was just like, I don't care. But in my neighborhood, I just remember everyone, like, we just would go outside and play, and we didn't think about anything about who you were, what you looked like, what background you had, because we all were all in the same neighborhood, and we all played the same games, and we just didn't think about stuff like that. And then my neighborhood went through a transition, and it wasn't a positive transition. As a matter of fact, the next door neighbor, there was a shooting in the house right next door, and my family started to fear just for kids walking down the street in this area. And it just so happened that my aunt and uncle had moved way out of the city into rural northeast Ohio, almost in the Pennsylvania border. And when mom and dad decided it was time to let's look at some other options for where we might move, we weren't thinking that. We were thinking maybe we'll just hit some of the suburbs of Cleveland and start heading east. But as we're looking at housing prices, et cetera, we found ourselves kind of out there close to my aunt and uncle who lived in Amish country. And so therefore we were living in Amish country as well. And so all of a sudden I'm in a school where no one looks like me in a sixth grade. And I remember going to, the first couple of days in school, and the kids were like, how do you get your hair to do that? That is amazing. You know, they were just like not being hateful or hurtful or anything. They were just trying to figure out, like, how do you get that to work? Because had never experienced it. Side story, one of the big games that the kids played at the elementary school was eraser tag, and they would just put an eraser on their head and try to catch the person, and if you caught them before the eraser fell off, you won. And I was making a killing in that game. Oh my gosh, because that eraser would never fall out of the afro. So they had to change that game out because that just wasn't working. But the other thing that people would say to me, again, it wasn't because they were being hurtful or mean-spirited or anything. They would just ask random questions that just used to always catch me off guard. Like, so what do you guys do at Thanksgiving? I was like, what do you mean? It's like, what do you people do like for Thanksgiving? And you know, those are the terms they use, those are the words they use, and that was a question. And like the part of me, because I could be a bit ornery and sarcastic at times, but like, we run around in the backyard around a fire. Like, what do you do at Thanksgiving? It's like, but again, people were asking questions because they were seeking understanding. There were also examples where I would be with my friends Christmas caroling, something that we didn't necessarily do in Cleveland, but I'm picking up Christmas caroling out in a small town. And in the midst of the Christmas caroling and the fun and going to one of the houses that we would go to, one of the people would say, oh, to me, like all this crowd of people, and they would point me out and say, oh, you must be one of the Wilson boys. Again, said, like, I recognize and I know your family, but I interpreted it as, why are you picking me out of this crowd? And so there was those kinds of moments that as I experienced that environment, I loved that part of my childhood. Had great experiences growing up in the country, but they helped shape who I am today in terms of how I understand how we come at our experiences, our conversations, based on our backgrounds and all that we know. And so why the Iran? When I was in high school in this district, our Spanish teacher said to us, I want you to have a pen pal from a Spanish-speaking country. And so we all had the opportunity to get a pen pal from one of those countries, Mexico, Spain, any country in South America. And so I had one from Mexico and Spain, and we had great conversations. And I learned so much about their countries and their cultures through those interactions. And so I got so excited by that I wanted to have pen pals from other countries, places I never would have thought to have a conversation and get to know someone. So I picked out Iran, Kuwait, South Africa, Greece, New Zealand, Israel. I had way more pen pals than I should have had at that time because it takes a while to write a letter, put it in the mail, ship it off to somewhere else in the world, and to get it back. And so when those letters would come back from places like Iran, I realized I didn't know anything. I had my thoughts about what it meant to be in Iran. And to share a quick story about my pen pal from there, she was a person her father was a intellectual. He was a college professor. And if you remember during the 80s, the revolution came across Iran. And after the revolution, everything changed. And her family, because they were part of this intellectual class, were looked at with suspicion. And so at the time, her family was like, we need to exit Iran and try to get to Turkey. And so they were literally on the plane in Tehran trying to get to Turkey. And I forget the name, but the Iranian authorities came onto the plane and said, we're halting this flight. Everyone get back into the terminal, and no one is allowed to leave the country. And during that time, if you also remember, there was a war between Iran and Iraq. During all that time, I had pen pals from those places and had conversations about daily life from those places. And one of the things that I said to my pen pal from Iran was, wouldn't you love to be able to come to America and to be an American and not have to worry about all of this? And it was part of my Amerocentric view of the world. And her response was, I love my country. This is my home. It's got some challenges right now, but this is my home. And so I don't really want to leave it. I want to fix it, and I want to make it better. And so that, again, just shapes my worldview in terms of how I approach the work that I do. And then finally, you look at, well, not finally, we got to talk about Maury, because I don't want, Maury Povich was an interesting moment in my life because I was doing some of the diversity training that was mentioned in the introduction. And I was trying to become a student of cultural competence and really understand biases and how we come at this work and how we are, the words that we say matter so much. And I was really deeply engaged in that work. And at the time I was a school principal and a group of us were in New York for a conference. Teachers, parents, and even several of my students that I was able to bring through a grant that we received. And we wanted to go to the Today Show and wave at our kids and say, hey, good morning, good to see you, before we went to the conference. Go to the Today Show, do our wave. We hear that our kids have saw us, and we're excited about that. But they were also handing out tickets to Phil Donahue. Any Phil Donahue fans in the room? Yeah. Okay. And Maury Povich. And all I knew about Maury Povich at that time was he was married to Connie Chung. That's all I knew. And this was before the Who's the Daddy world that now Maury is living in. He just had other topics of, that he talked about. So we were like, I don't know this Maury guy, but we can't go to the Phil Donahue because the schedule is wrong, so we went to Maury. So we get to the Maury Povich show. It's myself, a parent, and a teacher. And we get to the area where we're walking in, and for a moment we pause and say, ooh, we should ask what this topic's going to be, because if it's something inappropriate, and I'm a principal and you're a teacher and a parent of one of our children, this might not be good if once it gets on TV. So let's ask. And so we did. And the topic was adoption and keeping the families together, the children together, when the siblings especially together when they're being placed into homes. And that seemed so appropriate. We go inside, we sit down, the lights go down, and Maury comes out, and he's like, to our audience, prepping them for the show about to start. He's like, okay, folks, we've got 2 shows that we're taping today. Of course he did. The first show is it's not what I just told you. That was the second show. The first show that we were going to be there for was My Lover is a Racist. That was our show. My Lover is a Racist, and it began with all this heated conversation with, there was a police officer in Harlem and his wife, and he was a racist, and she was like, I don't know what to do about this, and they're screaming back and forth. There was a gay couple, and one of them was racist, and the other one was like, oh, I don't know what to do with this, and they were going back and forth, and there was like another family. It was horrible. I mean, and just in terms of like, oh my gosh, they are yelling, they're screaming, they're saying all these things. I don't want to be in this room, until they started talking about the children of these racist couples. And at that point, I don't know what caused this to happen. Like, I have no idea what caused this to happen as I sat there, but I put my hand up, and I was just like, before I could get it down, Maury comes running over with the mic, and he's like, hey, we've got, what's your question or your comment? And I was like, well, as a school principal, that's how I started. And then Maury's just like, oh my gosh, ladies and gentlemen, we have a school principal here in the room. Just imagine how this is going to play back in the district, right? We have a school principal in the room, and so when we come back from our commercial break, we're going to hear what this principal has to say about the children impacted by these racist parents. So just imagine hearts beating right now, because what am I doing? So I come back and I say something like, and this is something that I know anyone in this room would say, which is, I don't believe children are born racist. I believe that they see things around them that happen. They see the actions of those that they care about and who love them and that they love, and they mimic those actions. And before long, people tell them that they're different. They don't even realize that they are. And had all this conversation was part of my response. And the audience was applauding at different times. And then the expert came out and kept going back to what the principal said, So the reason I bring up this story is not because of anything I just said about Maury up to that point. It was 3, maybe 4 years later that I was watching, because I recorded it and was watching it later, that I was watching myself speak at the Maury Povich show. And I was looking at everything listening to everything that I said, and then I looked at what I was wearing. And so I told you I was from Cleveland. And so as I'm standing there talking about race and how important it is that we say and do certain things, et cetera, I am wearing a giant Cleveland Indians t-shirt with the most I believe, at this point, one of the most offensive Chief Wahoo pictures on my t-shirt. Let that sink in for a minute. So here I was like, we got to do something. We got to be different. And the reason I bring that up is because this work is so hard. We have so many blind spots when we're doing this work, when we're engaged in these conversations, so many blind spots. And there are people in Cleveland and elsewhere who believe that there's nothing wrong with Chief Wahoo. He's a symbol, and that's what it's always been, and that's how it always should be. And then there are people, particularly people of native descent, who will say, how could you? How could you have that be part of what you would wear? And so this work is hard, and it continues to get harder and harder. But I ask you, as Tiffany would say, to lean in to the conversations, because that's the only way we're going to get better. And then finally, I'm standing on top of Machu Picchu, because I do like to travel, and that was actually correct. And I think the reason I like to travel is because of the experiences that I had with my pen pals growing up. That's a bit of my story. What's yours? So what were some of your moments? What were some of those things that caused you to be who you are? As Tiffany said earlier this morning, we all have a culture, we all have a history, we all have experiences. And what I love for you to do, and this is again where I'm going to ask you to find someone, please, that you don't know. It's so easy to go to somebody you know, but please find someone that you don't know so that you can understand them a little differently than you did before you walked into this room. And talk about those moments, those pivot moments in your experience that got you to be the person that you are right now. Does that make sense? Find a place in this room and sit and have that conversation. And we're going to take about 10 or maybe 7 to 8 minutes for this conversation. Find your partner, someone you don't know. Please get up and find that person. Please get up and find that person. And I'll check with you in about 7 minutes. All right, thank you for leaning into that conversation. I would pause and say, so tell me something you learned about your new friend. But there's lots of things that you just learned that I'm hoping may have even caused you to think differently about something, or maybe create a new understanding that you have for yourself based on what you heard from your new friend. But this whole notion of sharing our stories and understanding our backgrounds, understanding what makes us who we are, I think is so important. And usually when I am in whatever the professional learning experience that we do, when we talk about the standards for professional learning, one of the standards is learning design. And in the learning design standard, it talks about paying attention to adult learning theory. And we know that adults like several things. They like choice. They like the opportunity to engage. They don't like sit and get. So if they're sitting for too long, they get antsy and they're ready to go and they're ready to do something. And so you know how it is with our kids. We'll say, you will sit and listen to me for 90 minutes and you will not move. But as an adult, we're like, 5 minutes and I'm gone if you've not engaged me in some kind of way. And that's pushing it with the 5 minutes. So the sharing your story becomes a strategy that's a learning design strategy, because it also gives people a chance to talk about something they know very well, and that is themselves and their own background and their own history. So one of the things I would encourage you to do in your own settings is think about ways to give people those opportunities to share more of who they are and what they are into the conversation. We often do it as an icebreaker. You all probably do it in lots of other different ways or have experienced it in different ways, but find ways to try to do that. You know, when we think about our what shapes how we think about the world and our own biases, I will tell you that I lived for 11 years in Chicago. And because of that experience, I now know what the best pizza in the world is. Like, I know it. So you might think differently because you might be one of those New York leaning folks who like to get the flat pizza that you can pick up in your hand and just eat it like that. Or you might be the person who likes, I can't even understand this, pizza on like a cracker almost, was so thin that it shatters in your hand, which I don't even understand. Because I know that the best pizza in the world is Chicago deep dish pizza. Pizza that could be baked in a pie pan because it's so thick, and there's so much cheese in here that it could take like an entire factory of cheese making to do one pizza. And it takes 45 minutes to an hour to bake because it's got to bake all the way through. And of course, the best thing to put in that pizza is pepperoni, because that's the only topping that actually matters. And so that's my truth, is the best type of pizza in the world is Chicago-style deep dish. And if you want a recommendation on where to go when you go to Chicago, Giordano's is my favorite. You may have heard of anybody, you know this? Okay, got it. So those people who put their hands up are the wise people in the room. Let's just get it out there. But the reality is, we all have our own biases and experiences when it comes to certain things. And we can have a pizza bias, we can have all kinds of other biases that inform who and what we are and how we think about the world. And I'm wondering, just think of them for a moment, like what's one of your non-pizza biases? And how does it show up sometimes in your work? And what might help you address whatever that non-pizza bias might be? And part of what we could talk about, if we had more time, and we'll certainly talk about a little bit more in the breakout session, is how our biases show up and how they impact the work that we do and how they inform the decisions that we make. And as you're creating professional learning experiences, we have to pay attention to these because they will inform how people engage with you in whatever the learning might be. Take a look at this picture and just tell me don't tell me like out loud right now, but in a minute, tell me what you see. So I'll ask for just give me a hand or something so I know, give me an example of what you see. Yes?
A loving family.
A loving family. Okay? Yes?
Yeah, close family. Somebody a bit aloof in the background, some great peace and abstract art.
Okay.
I was on the ground.
Rug.
Close family.
Close family, rug on the ground, throw. Okay? Anybody else? Yes?
I see their upstairs bathroom is leaking all the way down the wall.
Mhm.
Actually be frozen because they are in the Midwest at this time.
Okay. There you go. Upstairs bathroom leaking. Big time. Big time leak. All right, one more. What do you say?
A dominant figure, they're all facing, so the one person in the seat.
Mm-hmm. So there's something that you see about dominance in this picture because of the way that they are engaging with this person in the chair. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally get it. How many are seeing the dog for the first time when she said family dog? So a lot of folks, when they look at this, they don't even see the dog because they're so focused on the people that also know, oh, there's a dog in there. Let's ask this question, same thing. What do you see? Someone sees John Lennon. Someone sees John Lennon. Okay. Someone else, what do you say? Harry Potter. Barbells. And then someone else said dumbbells. Yeah.
The phone cord is not connected to the handset.
The phone cord not connected to the handset. You were about to say something here. 70s. Why do you say 70s? Yeah. So what's interesting, yeah, back here, what do you say?
Number 6 or
And what do you teach? There you go. The math teacher saw 6 written over and over again.
Like wires, possible barriers, wires.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So the point for both of these is we're all looking at the same picture, but based on our experiences, based on how we come at this, we're seeing different things. There are people who they look at that and they think it's a model for a tornado. But if you're in an area in the world where tornadoes don't exist, you would never think of that. This whole notion of dumbbells, it was like dumbbells or barbells or Harry Potter's glasses. Very different, right? But again, the point is who you are, what shapes you, causes you to see things that it's the same thing very differently. And so we have to pay attention to that when we're designing our learning experiences as well, right? So we have to pay attention to how things could be interpreted. So if we think about then our own sort of learning, if we were doing something in a school this might be a professional learning approach that we might take. So we start off by thinking about what is it that we want our students to know and be able to do. And then we start thinking about what kind of educator practice do we need. And then we get to that box number 3. And we're like, please let it work. And then we get to box 4 and we look at our student learning outcomes. So what we would suggest is the hope, prayer, and luck, although all important, may not be the best approach. Because if we can have an approach where we can predict what our students are going to be able to do based on what our educators are doing, based on their increase in knowledge and skills, based on the kind of professional learning that we know makes a difference in practice, then we would have a better likelihood of being able to predict how well our students do. So this is the approach that we take in the standards for professional learning when it comes to learning. And one of the things that we know is when it comes to our students, there's certain things that matter perhaps more than others in terms of the impact that we can make on our children. And so how many are fans of John Hattie or know John Hattie? Okay, so the 2 of us know John Hattie. So there's my John Hattie buddy. John Hattie out of Australia, currently working, I want to say as the president of the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership, but has done a lot of work around what we should be paying attention to when we engage with our students. And part of his argument was, he's giving, and this is based on meta-analyses and pulling a whole bunch of various studies together into one. So there are some people who are like, oh, what can you gain from looking at all those and trying to collapse it into one? But in looking at all these studies, he was like, anything with a 0.40 or higher effect size means these are the things that we should pay attention to when it comes to student learning, because they have the biggest bang for the buck or make the most difference based on every analysis and every research study that we can find. And so when you look at these, like homework, his point is not to not do homework, but he's saying homework has a 0.29 effect size, which is slightly higher than summer school, which is way higher than matching learning styles and ability grouping. And again, we can make an argument, but those are things that are important or maybe not, but notice here, retention. Negative effect. So not only is it not having a good effect, according to his research, it's having the opposite effect. And I know your superintendent is fighting a fight around retention in the district. But what I really want to show you is what's on the right side. So on the right side, he suggests that if we engage in some of these activities, we're likely to impact student learning even more. And so when you look at having high expectations for students, 1.44 effect size, which means definitely do that because it makes a huge difference. Formative evaluations, classroom discussions, all great things. But way on top of all of those is this notion of teacher collective efficacy, which we would call the learning community standard, or teachers engaging in conversations about their practice. Leaders engaging in conversations about their practice. Anyone who is an adult in a school system engaging in conversations about their practice, what ideas they're using, what strategies they're trying, sharing those ideas with each other, 1.57. So his point is, we got to do more of that in order to have an impact on students. It doesn't mean that we stop doing all the other things, but if we have limited time, we got to figure out ways to engage in some of those activities. So we know that that's really important. And we know that having conversation increases and deepens our understanding around certain things. So I want to have one of those conversations right now. So you all experienced the equity framework this morning, and you learned hopefully a few things, you thought differently about certain things, or you found yourself challenged at certain times in that conversation. What I'd love for you to do is, this is what they showed our partner, someone who's close, could be someone, but what they partner, groups of 2 or 3, is to have this conversation. Engage in this collective efficacy around the equity framework and talk about something that was a new learning, talk about something that you may need to learn or do in order to move to the next step or move to the next level with regard to what you heard this morning. Talk about the challenges that you might have in implementing some of what you learned this morning. Engage in collective efficacy and collaboration around the ideas that were shared this morning. So I'm going to pause, and ask, what questions do you have about this conversation that you're about to have with a shoulder partner? So groups of 2 or 3, and we'll pause for it. We'll have about a 5 to 6 minute conversation around these bullets. So at this point, Jeff, I'm looking at you because I'm going to ask you to get your notebook out and take some notes, because we're going to get some feedback from the team about their responses to some of these bullets. So what are some things that you're thinking about? What was learning? What did you need? What came out of your conversation? You don't have to tell me the whole conversation with just one point. Yes.
I'm jumping straight to number 3.
Right to number 3.
Because the challenge is overcoming your own fears and recognizing that you need to have some boldness, which kind of answers number 2 as well.
Mm-hmm.
But not letting that stop you, and not looking at the bigger picture, but recognizing you need to take baby steps.
Yep. Very powerful and very important and very true. Someone else. Thank you. Yes.
We were talking about the challenges that we talked about on awards thing, where one child can get 20 or 30 awards. There is a challenge to teach our kids. That's not reality. You're going to go to college, and your first year's tuition is a waste because you expect everyone to think the sun rises and sets on you.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not teaching them reality.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of teaching them to be humble, to teaching them to know who they really are and value all that hard work was for themselves, not for all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not what the world is going to give them.
So the challenge, and so the point of how do we prepare kids for the world that we'd like them to have, along with the world that they're in. And that's a huge challenge. So thank you for that. Yeah. Someone else. Yes.
Right? Okay, with the build employee capacity.
Mm-hmm.
That left to
The whole notion of building employee capacity. Yeah, I'll let you continue.
that's pretty much it.
Okay. And it's a huge issue. Having these conversations, going back to the first point about, it's hard to have these kind of conversations. It's hard to know what to say sometimes, because depending on whatever background experiences, whatever you've had, this is just Fred talking, not representing any district or organization, but there are times where it's like, oh, I don't want to say that because it'll be taken this way. And if I say that, it'll be interpreted as I'm thinking that way, and so I'm not going to say that. So I spend so much time spinning my wheels about what I can't say in terms of how it would be interpreted, then I don't say anything. And then therefore we don't move forward. And so how do we create, we'll come back to a slide later if we have time, just the trust, the environment to even have the conversation, and how do we build the capacity of our leaders and those who are leading these conversations to be able to do that? Because this is just me speaking, you can do more harm than good and actually take 3 steps back when you sort of rip the Band-Aid off and force people to have certain conversations that we've not created the environment for them to have. So that's something that I think is really important. And as a system, I know that's something that you're trying to think through. Follow-up comment.
I would like to answer that from my perspective.
Yeah.
I think that it's just so essential that we be our authentic selves
Yeah.
and solicit feedback. Solicit the feedback from the students, solicit feedback from our peers, and go from there and kind of continue that journey of development. But it's just, you gotta be authentic.
Yeah.
You gotta be true. You know, because there's so much in life that, you know, yeah, people are afraid. There's fears. And a lot of what the way that we behave is grounded in fear. But it's really important, I think, to have the students come in line and come with them and be our place.
Agreed. So thank you for that, and thank you for thinking about this, because this is something that it's not my issue, it's not the Office of Diversity's issue, it's our collective issue, because we all have collective responsibility for every child in this district, right? So each of us in the role that we play in some way shapes what will happen with that child, and we have to be our authentic self and have the conversation so that we can come at this with our true selves and continue to find ways to grow. Because as evidenced by my standing at the Maury Povich show with my Chief Wahoo t-shirt, even those who think that we've got this figured out still have a ton to learn. And so that's something that I think we all need to remember is everybody's engaged in a cycle of continuous improvement and learning around these issues. So, by the way, we're not going to have time to get through half of what I wanted to share with you, but I'm just going to keep going until I come to what I think is a logical stopping point so that we can break for lunch. So, you know, in this challenge, if we were like, if this circle were all the things that we needed to know about equity and diversity and race and culture, if the whole circle was everything, there's probably like a small sliver, even smaller than that green one for me in terms of what I actually know. And then the blue are the things that for me are like, okay, these are things I know I don't know, and I got to get some information on those things because I know that I need to, like, I don't understand because I've not had lots of experiences with people from our native culture. And I want to have more of those experiences so that I could better understand what the issues are in those communities as we start to engage with those families, et cetera. So I know that that's a learning need that I have. And all the other ones I would say are in the blue. But then there's this whole yellow section of stuff I don't even know I don't know. I didn't even know it was a thing. And as we think about how to engage in these conversations, this is the hardest thing to start to think about how to design professional learning around because you don't even know that you don't know it. And so therefore you're not seeking information or answers around it. It's completely in your blind spot and you wouldn't have even thought it was a thing. And so as you think about the kind of professional learning that you're engaged in or that you're supporting back in your systems, thinking about the yellow becomes something that's another important point for consideration. And to share some of that, I used to play this game of cards, this innocent game of cards, when I was doing this diversity training in Ohio way back in the 90s. And the card game would start off with, and I was going to do it with you, just so you know, so the fact that you're hearing the story about it and didn't have to do it, consider that a good thing, maybe, you tell me. So you get the cards, everybody got 2 cards. And now the game starts, you got like 3 minutes to trade cards with people. And the goal is, when you're done, you've got the highest score. Should have played this because we're in Nevada and it would have been like a great gaming game, but whatever. So when you're done, I would say, okay, how many people had a score of 25 or higher? These hands will go up. And then how many people had a score of 10 or lower? And the hands will go up. And then I would divide the group based on their score on the card game. And those who had the 25 or higher, we call them the squares, put them in the front. And for the rest of the session, which could be 2 hours or it could be 2 days, we treated them like gold. They could do no wrong. You've seen these types of simulations before. The group that was the low score, put them in the back as far away as we could, just so they wouldn't cause any trouble, because we knew that what we would tell people is this card game was a kind of an indication of your abilities in lots of different ways. And what we have found that the people who scored 25 or higher on this simple card game are actually the smartest people in the room. And they get things that the other people just don't get. And the people who had a score of 10 or lower, well, they seem nice. And then there's the people in the middle that you notice I didn't even mention them in anything, are the people that we just ignore for the rest of the simulation. It's like they don't exist. So the way that can go, you can imagine that could go lots of different ways, right? So it can go in a way where people are like, okay, I'm going to like live up to the role that or the label that you've given me, and they play their parts well. And other times people are like, I'm not playing this game, and I know what you're doing, fool me once, whatever. So there are those people. And then other people who it becomes like an emotional exercise that can have implications that go far beyond that moment. Case in point, I was at John Carroll University in Ohio, Cleveland area of Ohio, and we played the game. And one of the rules that I added to the game was we're going to play a second round. And in round 2, the people who are on the higher, echelon or whatever, I'm going to tell them secretly that the rules have changed, and now you want actually to have the lowest score. So they now have a piece of information. The people in the lower group, I'm like, okay, we're playing the card, to everybody else, we're playing the card game again, but I told the lower group, specifically pulled them together and said, we're playing the card game again. Of course, the middle group, I don't know what they were doing. So, because we just didn't pay attention to them the whole time. And so when it was about time, we took a break, and I said, when we come back from the break, we're going to play the game again. High group, take 20 minutes for your break. I'll see you when you come back. I trust all of you to come back because you're my stars. Low group, we're going one at a time, and when the one, because I don't know if you'll even come back, because I don't know if I can trust that you'll come back, so we're going to go one at a time, and then when you leave, the next person can go, and hopefully we'll get through all of you, but if we don't, well, we got to start on time. And so that's kind of the setup. Imagine sort of the way people respond and react to this sort of environment. Again, it could go on for 2 hours or 2 days. Come back from the break, a gentleman who was in the lower group said, I'm not playing this card game anymore. I'm done. I was like, well, why? It's like, we're having so much fun. And he said, I needed to mail a package during the break that was really important. And because you had this sort of rule here, I couldn't mail my package. And so you know how some people, like when you're in a professional learning experience, they just hand you the gift of, oh gosh, I can say like 20 things based on what he just said. So the first thing I said was, wow, why didn't you mail your package? Like, if I were playing the game and I was one of the people in the room and I knew that you were here for 2 hours and you're going to be gone, I probably would have just got up and mailed my package. Like, I'm not going to give you power over me. And so what is it that causes us sometimes to give people power over them? What was the situation, what was the social dynamic that caused him to give me power to keep him going from out of the room? Part of it was we were in this setting, this academic setting. We're at the university. If the professor says something, that we should pay attention to those things and whatever. But he gave me power and he didn't go mail his package. 2, I was like, wow, we're playing this game for 2 hours and you couldn't take it. And there's some folks who are playing this game their entire life because of the wheelchair that they're in, because of the language that they speak, because of the color of their skin, because of whatever. And for 2 hours, you're like, I can't deal with this anymore. And so that led to a lot of conversation. But what was interesting about how this plays out in different environments is it cuts to the core, because when we experience something, even when we know it's a simulation, it cuts at us in a way that sometimes we don't even expect. And so, again, I would argue, as you're thinking about your own learning situations, how do you do that in such a way that you give people the time to really engage and feel what it's like so that they can help change their practice? And so an example of that is, we'll look at this video of a backwards bike. And when you watch this video, I guess the question to ask is, what does this have to do with professional learning or learning in any way, shape, or form?
Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. You've heard people say it's just like riding a bike, meaning it's really easy and you can't forget how to do it, right? But I did something. I did something that damaged my mind. It happened on the streets of Amsterdam, and I got really scared, honestly. I can't ride a bike like you can anymore. Before I show you the video of what happened, I need to tell you the backstory. Like many 6-year-olds with a MacGyver mullet, I learned how to ride a bike when I was really young. I had learned a life skill and I was really proud of it. Everything changed, though, when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses, and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle, and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike, ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Salmon. First attempt riding the bicycle.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer, can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it. Downwards force on the pedals, leaning your whole body, pulling and pushing the handlebars, gyroscopic precession in the wheels. Every single force is part of this algorithm. And if you change any one part, it affects the entire control system. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I tell you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences, and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick, or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain. For instance, this guy. I offered him $200 just to ride this bike 10 feet across the stage. Everybody thought he could do it.
No, you didn't understand. You didn't understand. So, this way. Alright, so, whenever you're ready, go. Quickly! No, you have to keep your feet on. Alright, so here we go. Like you gotta start rolling at least. And go. Keep your feet on the pedal. Go. Keep your feet on the pedal. Yeah, come on.
Once you have a rigid way of thinking in your head, sometimes you cannot change that, even if you want to. So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike, and the next day I could. It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird though. It's like there's this trail in my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road it was more familiar with. Any small distractions at all, like a cell phone ringing in my pocket, would instantly throw my brain back to the old control algorithm and I would wreck. But at least I could ride it. My son is the closest person to me genetically, and he's been riding a normal bike for 3 years. That's over half his life. I wanted to know how long it would take him to learn how to ride a backwards bike, so I told him if he learned how to ride a backwards bike, he could go with me to Australia and meet a real astronaut.
Are you going to give up? Go ahead. This is how it starts. Look at this. This is such a big deal. Get up, you got it. Did you see his brain get it? So he, in, how many weeks have we been doing this? 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, he did something that took me 8 months to do, which demonstrates that a child has more neuroplasticity, am I even saying that right, than an adult.
It's clear from this experiment that children have a much more plastic brain than adults. That's why the best time to learn a language is when you're a young child.
All right, today's bike log. I can ride smooth, I can ride fast. I'm thinking the experiment is over. Okay, now I'm in Amsterdam, a city that has more bicycles than people. The question is, can I ride a normal bike now? I mean, I've spent all this time unlearning how to ride a bike. If I go back and try to ride a normal one, will my brain mess up? So I've tweeted a Smarter Everyday meetup, if you will, and I'm going to see if somebody brings a bicycle, and I'm going to try to ride a normal bike.
This was one of the most frustrating moments of my life. I had ridden a normal bike since I was 6, but in this moment I couldn't do it anymore. I had set out to prove that I could free my brain from a cognitive bias. But at this point, I'm pretty sure that all I proved is that I could only redesignate that bias.
So what you're not seeing is just a group of people here looking at me, looking at the strange American that can't ride a bike because they think I'm dumb. But I'm actually 2 levels deep into this because I've learned and unlearned. All right.
After 20 minutes of making a fool out of myself, suddenly my brain clicked back into the old algorithm. I can't explain it, but it happened in a very specific moment.
I got it. I'm back. Oh, click. Hold it, click. I got it. Okay, there it is. There's the moment. Okay, I can ride a bike.
I tried to explain this to the people around me, and they just didn't get it. They thought I was faking the previous 20 minutes, and I couldn't get anybody to believe me.
That looked like I faked it, didn't it?
Yeah.
Just a fake. You think I'm faking? You don't believe me. You think I'm lying, don't you? I'm not lying.
I felt like the only person on the planet who had ever unlearned how to ride a bike, and I couldn't articulate it to anyone because everybody just knew that you can't forget how to ride a bike. So I learned 3 things from this experiment. I learned that welders are often smarter than engineers. I learned that knowledge does not equal understanding. And I learned that truth is truth, no matter what I think about it. So be very careful how you interpret things. because you're looking at the world with a bias, whether you think you are or not. I'm Destin. Get smarter every day. Have a good one. Hey, it's good.
All right, so as we bring our conversation to a close, because we're out of time, just think about that video, think about this conversation around bias, think about everything that we heard this morning, and if you would turn to your partner and just say, what came to you as you were watching this video? What does this have to do with anything that we've talked about today or anything that you heard this morning from Tiffany? Take about 2 minutes to have that conversation. All right. If I could get you back this way. So if we had more time, and we will have more time in the afternoon session for those who come, but if we had more time, we could talk about this video and its implications, and there are a lot of them, right? The one thing I'll say to you so that you all hear this, if you want this video, for whatever reason, because it might be useful for you, you can just, and I said this yesterday, you can Google backwards bicycle, and you can also add, if you want to be sure that you find it, Smarter Every Day, because that's the site that it came from. And I told the group yesterday, I used to say Google all the time when I would say something like this, and I was at a meeting that was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I said, Google this, and they suggested that I say, or use a search engine of your choice. So I leave that with you. The other thing that I will say with this video is, notice again how hard this can be, how long it takes. He was committed for 18 months. Was it 18? 8. 8. I'm making it even longer than it was. 8 months. Intrinsically motivated to do this. So he was like, I'm going to get this done. And even with that, he said the slightest distraction, like the cell phone in the pocket, would take him off course. And so when you think about our own learning and our own professional engagement opportunities, it takes a while. We have to give ourselves time to really change our practice. And even when we do, that distraction of this new policy that just got introduced, or this new thing from the state, or this disruption in my school or my classroom takes us right back to our old ways. And so we have to figure out strategies to not let us step backwards when we really want to move forward. So in the afternoon session, for those that I have a chance to work with, one of the things I'm going to ask you to do, because I'm not going to talk much during that session, is for you to develop a strategy of something that will help either you personally or your setting engage in some of the conversations connected to what we talked about this morning. I'm going to ask the others in the room to give you feedback on what it is that you think through. And so it's going to be a work session. It's not going to be a presentation session. It's going to be more engaging. But at this point, I just want to say to the whole group, since I won't see you all this afternoon, thank you for your attention. Thank you for leaning into the conversations around these issues. And thank you, most importantly, for the work that you do on behalf of the kids of Washoe County. Because I know that if it wasn't for the people who care like you, our kids would have less of a chance than I think they do now. So thank you, and continued best wishes for the school year.